Choosing an army for a tabletop wargame can be really tough at any stage in your hobby, but especially if you're first starting out. I'll be discussing my 5 picks for some great starter armies for Age of Sigmar. This is Budget Wah. Let's dive into it. So whether you're just starting out with Age of Sigmar or tabletop wargaming as a whole, or maybe you already play Age of Sigmar and are looking for a second army to play, I'll be going over my 5 suggestions for some great starter armies for Age of Sigmar. Now, as a quick disclaimer, this gets said often, so I won't harp on it, but if there's an army you love, in general, go for it. The only time I would say if you're really caught between two is think about your budget. Some of the armies are just much more expensive than others, but you're going to be spending a lot of time with these models, so it's important to pick some that you really like. That being said, we're going to be going through these 5 armies in no particular order, and the criteria I'm considering in choosing these are value, how much does it cost to get a playable army on the table, ease of painting, and how old are the sculpts. How easy is it to get your army painted? We'll be talking about the rules complexity and the learning curve, and with that we'll discuss whether the army has a current 3rd edition battletome. If you're new to the game, battletomes are where you get your faction specific rules for your army. They're kind of pricey, they're like $50. So having one that's in date and updated is important. And then lastly, model count. If you're looking at one army that has 20 models to field a fully playable army, and another that requires like 80, it's going to be a lot easier to get 20 models built, paint it, construct it, get you up and playing, get you some momentum with the hobby. So that's something really to think about. Also consider whether the army has faction terrain. This is a quirk of Age of Sigmar, but certain factions have a terrain piece that gives you free benefits. It doesn't cost anything in points value to run in your army, but they cost a lot of money in real world value if you buy them from Games Workshop, as well as summoning. Some armies let you summon in additional units, so that's actually more models that you have to purchase and have on hand and paint it to play the game. And then for each army, we'll also go over my personal recommendations for first purchases if you're starting out each of these armies. Let's get into it. So this may not surprise you if you've seen the first video I ever published on my channel, but I do recommend the Stormcast Eternals as a great starter army. These are kind of the poster boys of Age of Sigmar. They're the resident good guys. They're immortal, superhuman warriors of Sigmar, who is the god king of the setting, who reigns in Azir, which is this holy plane and kind of the only nice place in the setting in a lot of ways when the kind of chaos invaded the rest of the Age of Sigmar multiverse. These are the spirits of heroes who, after their death, were brought back to be these immortal, superhuman warriors. And they very much play like that on the table. And they're also the cheapest army to get started with. So let's dive into why they make a great starter for us. So you see, starting off on the bottom left, I've ranked the Stormcast Eternals as an S if we were going to give them sort of tier rankings for each of these categories in terms of cost. This is by far the cheapest army to get into the game right now because the Dominion box is so cheap. You can find the Dominion launch box for a 3rd edition, which was meant to be a limited edition run, but they produced a lot of them, so many that they're very cheap to find right now. And in that box you get a boatload of Stormcast Eternals, and they're great models too. You get a full 1,000-point starter army and then some just by buying that box for $100. And if you can split the box with a friend, give the orcs to a friend, then it's $50 for a full 1,000-point starter army. So you're kind of on the level of, you know, an average board game in terms of cost to get you up and running with the game, which is awesome. I think it's great to have a cheap point of entry into this hobby. So this is a really great time to get into the game, especially if you're interested in these guys. In terms of painting, I give them an A, kind of like the Space Marines from 40K. They have large, flat blank armor panels, which is great if you're first starting out because you can put a metallic paint on them and get great results, make them look like armored knights. And then as your painting progresses, there's so much you can do with these. Just Google Stormcast Eternals painted and you can see the incredible creative jobs that some people have done painting these guys up. There are some fiddly bits like banners and shields that can be a little trickier, especially if you're starting out, but you know, they paint up really nice. In terms of gameplay, they're thematic, and the nice thing is they're an elite army. And by elite army, I mean you're running a relatively small number of units, which is thematic because these are supposed to be like superhuman warriors, right? So generally, you can very much run a army of, 20 models, something like that, which is less to keep track of when you're playing the game. It's less to paint. And it's less to pay for, which is great, right? And then this, in terms of gameplay, one critique Stormcast get and why some people sometimes don't suggest they're a great starter army is because their range is huge. You can see just from the pictures I have here that there's a lot of different units in the army, and that can be overwhelming, and it's probably going to continue because Games Workshop has been pumping out new Stormcast models like they've been going out of style, while there are other armies that barely have any models. So they get a lot of flack for that. However, they're still a great starter army because if you buy the Dominion box, it really gives you kind of a good direction to lean into. There's built-in rules and synergies in that box that gives you a great core, and then you can pick out additional units or even just things that speak to you in a way to build on that when you're just getting started out. The large line can be a blessing and a curse because it can mean when they update the rules that maybe what was working well for you one edition may not work so well in the future, but they're very easy to get into, low model count, great army to start out with. So as far as initial purchases for the Stormcast Eternals, like I mentioned, I would recommend the Dominion box for anybody starting out, or the Stormcast half of the Dominion box you can find on eBay or split with a friend. But even if you're buying the whole Dominion box, you can find it for around $100 to $120 for 1,415 points of Stormcast Eternals. Now to give you some context if you're new to the game, points are how you balance your armies out. Every unit costs a certain number of points. People typically play the game at 2,000 points is considered the full-sized game. 1,000 points also works very well. So you've got an army in a box right there. And then you basically done. You can just paint those up, play some games, and then look into buying more later on. But if you're looking to move into next purchases, one thing you might want to look into, rather than you could buy another Dominion box to just double your forces, but you're going to be doubling up on some heroes that you may not want two of. The Warcry Thunderstrike box gives you two very versatile units for $60. It gives you another unit of Vindictors, which is a battle line, the Spearmen you see here. And it gives you another unit of the Annihilators, which are a very tough unit, very fighty, very strong, hard to can hold objectives and things. And importantly, in this box, you get the option to make them with either the two-handed great hammers or with the shield, which gives them some different mechanics in the game. Dominion only comes with the shield option. You could consider going into Fulminators. One thing Dominion lacks is particularly mobile units. It's all infantry except for Yndrasta, the angel-looking hero. She can fly, but everybody else is pretty slow. Fulminators are a cavalry unit that do a ton of damage. Just make sure that when you're building your Dracothian Guard kit, which you see here, that you pick the right weapons option for what you want. I would recommend Fulminators in the current edition of the game. $70, 230 points. Alternatively, you can build one of them as a Lord Celestant on Dracoth to give you another hero option, and you can run the one Fulminator on his own. The other box I would look at if I was just starting out with Stormcast is the Vanguard Raptors. The Long Strike Raptors are a very powerful sniper type of unit that can deal a lot of damage at range, which is something that the Dominion box is kind of lacking. And one nice thing is you also get this unit of 3 birds, the Ether Wings in the back, which incidentally, you can just throw into your 14, 15 point Dominion box to bring it up to a 1500 point army, and use them to go around and snag objectives if you want. Okay, so moving on, the next army I recommend for starting out with Age of Sigmar is the Beastclaw Raiders. These are a tribe of ogres who are nomadic, and they all ride these kind of giant frost beasts. In the lore, they are plagued and cursed with this thing called the Everwinter. It's this horrible winter storm that follows them wherever they go. So they're on this perpetual hunt, always eating. They have this insatiable hunger, and they'll eat just about anything they come across. And then this winter storm follows them along. So they're kind of a menace on the countryside, if you will. You don't really want to see these guys showing up for breakfast. But they're a really thematic army, and they fall under the Ogre Maw Tribe's battletome, which brings me to a quick disclaimer. They have a new battletome very, very soon. At the time of this video, they just announced it's coming soon. The exact date isn't out, but I would expect within the next couple weeks. So if you're thinking of starting this army, you might want to wait for the new battletome. Although they have a very good box right now that might change, so I'll go over that in a minute too. So why are the Beastclaw Raiders such a great army for newer players or getting started with a new army in Age of Sigmar? Well, they are very cost effective currently, although that may be changing. But currently there's a starter box available where you can build an entire army buying just this one discounted box, and that's why they get an A for cost. In terms of painting, the models are older, but they are plastic. There aren't any, at least in the mainline stuff that's going to be in this box that I'm about to recommend. It's all multi-part plastic kit, so you're not dealing with resin. However, the models are showing their age a little bit. And perhaps more importantly, there's a lot of skin to paint, which can be more difficult to get a good result on when you're first starting with painting. But there's also a lot of large areas of fur and armor plates and tusks and things like that that would take very well to contrast paints or a dry brush, which are very beginner-friendly techniques. Gameplay, I give them a B+ because they're very beginner-friendly destruction army kind of gameplay. They are tough. They're an elite army. It's going to be a low model count, as you can see on the right, given that you're going to have several big heroes on big monsters, and then you're going to have these little cavalry squads backing them up. So it's less to keep track of, and good if you're looking to just kind of charge in and do a bunch of damage and tear stuff up. The Beastclaw Raiders are quite a fun army in that regard. Okay, so here is why they're a great value, and I'm a little dismayed to announce that literally as I'm recording this video, Games Workshop has pulled this Start Collecting box within the last couple of days on their website. It was up there a couple days ago when I made the slides for this. It's gone now. So if you want this, I would look for it now. You can still find it for $80 on places like Amazon, probably at your local game store, but you might want to grab it now if you were thinking of buying this army, because it's probably going to be going away, which is unfortunate. And I apologize as I made these slides, and then Games Workshop announced the new battletome, and it looks like, yes, they are going to be getting rid of this box and releasing a new vanguard kit. And if I had to guess, you know, we can do predictions. My guess is that it's going to be a weird mix of Beastclaw Raiders and the other ogres, or it's just going to be the other side of Ogre Maw tribes, which we'll have to see how well that works. With that ran over, the Beastclaw Raiders Start Collecting box is one of the best. If for $95 you get, this was the MSRP 2 days ago, you can find it for $80 online right now. You get 435 to 590 points worth of Beastclaw Raiders, depending on how you build them. Now you might look at it and say, oh, well, it's like $95 for only 5 guys, but they're pretty big models, and they carry a lot of weight on the table. You get one unit of Mornfang pack, which is the little cavalry guys, And then the big model can be built in a lot of different ways. You can build it as either a Frost Lord or a Huskard or Beast Riders, which are two different heroes, or a generic option to be the rider. And then you can build it as either a Stonehorn or a Thunder Tusk for the mount. So in just this one model, you have 6 different options for how to build it. So that's why this is a great option, because after you buy your first one, I would recommend buying another one. And then after that, I would have recommended buying another one, although it may be becoming harder to find these boxes in the near future, unfortunately. We'll have to wait and see what they announce in terms of the new Vanguard Beastclaw Raiders, which I was hoping they would keep this box around, kind of like they did with Sylvaneth, but at least right now it's MIA from the Games Workshop website. So sorry to say, it's probably going away. But unfortunate, I discovered that literally while making the video. But hey, that's the way Games Workshop goes. Good news is you can still find it right now, at least. So there you go. It's a good box. It's you can buy 4 of these and you got a 2,000 point army more or less. Army in a box. It's cool. All right, moving over to the Death Armies. My next recommendation for a starter army is going to be another army with a great starter box currently, and this is the Flesh Eater Courts. So the Flesh Eater Courts is an army that's based off of the ghouls from the Vampire Counts and Death Armies from Warhammer Fantasy Battle or the Total War games, if you're familiar. And these guys are a bunch of bloodthirsty ghouls and zombie dragons or terror geists that are just kind of wreaking havoc. But the kind of fun piece of the lore is they're actually all deluded undead who think that they're a bunch of noble knights. So this is, arguably what happened to Bretonia in Age of Sigmar. They're this now, but in their mind, they're Knights of the Round Table. So, and there's some kind of fun mechanics that play with that in the game. Let's dig into why they're a good starter army. So I wanted to include one death army in this list, and I actually went back and forth quite a bit over whether it would be Flesh Eater Courts or Night Haunt, and I ultimately settled with Flesh Eater Courts, primarily for reason of cost. They have a great start collecting box that gets you a Terrorgeist, the big zombie dragon looking thing, or you can build it as a zombie dragon. Confusingly enough, they're 2 separate units, but it's a very versatile box, much like the Beastclaw Raiders. You can buy a couple of these boxes and have a fully functional army for the table. The models are older, which does mean in general they're a bit cheaper than some of the newer sculpts. As far as painting goes, I give them an A-, largely because the models are older. However, even though they're older, they take paint very well because they're very simple. You could very easily just kind of do them in 1 or 2 tones, slap some contrast paint. You could do slap chop with these guys, and there's a lot of kind of blank surfaces for getting more creative if you wish. Doing some like kind of vibrant color schemes, these guys could really pop. And Terrorgeists make for kind of great, more centerpiece models, and you get them in the discount box, which is nice. Gameplay wise, I give them a B with a heavy asterisk here, because this is the one army that I'm recommending that still has a 2nd edition battletome, and there's no current indication, I'll likely get one at some point, maybe next year, of them getting a new battletome. So unlike Beastclaw Raiders, which are about to get their new battletome, these guys are still stuck with the old rules, which is can be harder to kind of play with because they tend to be a little more restrictive in some ways. But looking through their current rule set, it's pretty straightforward as far as 2nd edition rule books go. Model count is another downside of this army. It's going to be medium to high. You're going to want a lot of these ghouls, and while they paint up very easily, you're probably going to want a large horde of them, and you can summon them in, so you're just going to have to paint a lot of ghouls. So if you don't like ghouls, I wouldn't go for this, but if you do like ghouls, then this may be the army for you. So as far as initial purchases for Flesh Eater quartz, I do recommend the Start Collecting box. This is a great value. For $95 or less at a discount, you can get 625 to 710 points worth of your army in one go, depending on how you build the models in the box. Inside the box, you get a Terrorgeist, which is that big zombie dragon looking thing in the middle, which is a very exciting, fighty, killy model. And just it's really fun to play on the tabletop. I haven't played it myself, but it's got very powerful rules. And then you can build it in several ways. You can build it just as a Terrorgeist. You can build it as a Terrorgeist with a Ghoul King on, which is probably what you want to do for your first kit, because that makes it a hero. Or you can build it as a zombie dragon or a zombie dragon with the Ghoul King on, and then you can also technically build them with a Vampire Lord on top, but don't do that if you're playing Flesh Eater Quartz. It's a holdover from Fantasy Battle, but it's not actually part of this army. You can also build for your kind of elite infantry, you get 3 Crypt Horrors or Crypt Flayers, depending on how you build them. And they can also be built as Vargheists. Again, don't do that. The Vargheists are not actually part of Flesh Eater Quartz. But of note, there is a hero in Flesh Eater Quartz, the Varghulf Courtier, that you might want to run one of, and you could probably kit bash it out of the pieces you get out of this box if you want. And then you get 10 Crypt Ghouls, which are kind of your, your baseline troops for the Flesh Eater Quartz, and you're just going to want a lot of these, both for running in your army and for summoning onto the table. Second purchase and purchases after that, I would recommend buying more of this box. This is another one of those armies you could build entirely out of this box. There is 2 kind of extensions to that in this, unlike Beastclaw Raiders though, in that you probably want to buy this throne. It looks nice. It's 45 bucks. You could probably build one on your own to save some money, but it is a terrain piece for this army that gives you certain buffs within the army for free. It doesn't get you any points in your army, so take that for what you will. I'm not a big fan of these terrain pieces, and that's why this is the only army I actually recommend that actually has one of these terrain pieces. They're often a bit of a tax on getting your army up and going, in my opinion. But on a happier note, there's a pretty solid hero that you can get for not too much, 32 bucks at full price, less at a discount or secondhand. You get the Aberrant Archregent. He's a very powerful hero model and wizard for your army, and he's 250 points for a foot hero, and he's quite solid, and at least in the current battletome, an important piece of the army. So this would be the one guy I would look at picking up outside of the Start Collecting boxes to start. Okay, and if you know this channel at all, you probably could have seen this one coming, and even if you don't know this channel at all, you probably could have guessed from the title slide. The Ironjawz are a very popular suggestion for a first army in Age of Sigmar, and for good reason. They are very beginner friendly. They are great models, great rules. If you're really looking to play this game and just fight and have a good time, then you actually are kind of an Ironjawz yourself, because that's exactly what they are in the lore. They're these big, massive orcs with like heavy armor that just want to fight, and that's all they care about. They think it's a great old time. They call it having a good scrap, or crumpin', which is killing. And actually, fun fact, it's canon in the lore that they make their armor by punching sheets of metal repeatedly until it can shape onto their bodies. So that's dedication. Let's dive into why they're a great starter army. So the Ironjawz, currently I give them a B+ for cost. Actually, they also have a wonderful starter box. However, Games Workshop raised the price not too long ago, so it's not as good a value as it used to be because of that price hike, but you can still find a lot of this army for a pretty good discount compared to other armies for a couple reasons. One, it's been around a while, and you can find it on the secondhand market pretty well, especially on eBay. The same is true of Flesh Eater Quartz and Beastclaw Raiders for that matter. And number two, the starter kit is just it's still got most of what you need to get your army started. Because the army only has like 7 different models, which is kind of a blessing because there's not that much you have to kind of worry about when you're expanding your army collection. Painting wise, I give it an A plus. They're great looking models, but they're also very simple in a lot of ways. They're all plastic and they all take paint really well. They have large kind of like the Stormcast, actually large kind of armor plates that you can get creative with, or you can just slap some contrast or metallic paints on them and they'll look just fine. Gameplay wise, I give them an S. I think they're the best army in terms of gameplay for learning as a new player. The rules are very thematic, very much about just getting your army across the board and fighting. And they do that very, very well. And even if you lose, you're probably going to have a good time because you're going to tear stuff up while you're doing it. Model count is low. They're, while if you're familiar with Warhammer Fantasy Battle or the Total War games, the orcs are more of a horde style army. The Ironjawz are actually more of an elite army. They're kind of like the toughest of the tough orcs. So you don't actually need that many guys to run a full army. So as far as initial purchases for the Ironjawz, I do still recommend they start collecting Ironjawz kit. It's among the best. In this you get a War Chanter, 10 Ardboys, and 3 Gorgruntas, and this is just a core for any Ironjawz army in many ways. The Ardboys currently aren't as consistently used as they used to be in second edition, but the Gorgruntas are very powerful right now. Ardboys are still great to have around, and I expect they may become more prevalent depending on how the rules go in the game. And the War Chanter is your key utility buff hero, which is great because you typically want multiple of that hero. That tends to be what holds these start collecting boxes down, is they have some hero that you only want one of. The War Chanter is not that. You want 2 or 3 of him, so you can buy 2 or 3 of these boxes. You got a great start to your army. Next, for new players, I would recommend looking into the Mega Boss on foot as a hero to complement the start collecting box. He's a great kind of general or starter general for your army, and that he has this ability where you can issue commands to multiple units, but he also is just very fighty, a very fun model. He fights if he dies, so you're always going to get some value out of him unless he gets shot off the board, and just something that's great to have in your pocket for any Ironjawz player. And then, of course, you may want to consider getting a Maw Crusher. Some people lovingly refer to these as cabbages because the dragon looks a little bit like a cabbage. This is run in most competitive Ironjawz, well, pretty much all competitive Ironjawz lists. It's a big bad orc on a big bad dragon. It's one of the scariest models in the game in many ways because it is so powerful on the table. At least it has been in this edition and the last. And also the nice thing is it is $125. This is one of the only big cost models I'm going to recommend in this whole video, but he's like 500 points, so that's like a quarter of your army in one purchase. So combine that with some of the foot guys and you've got a great start. And then lastly, you might want to look into the brutes. They're a more elite unit. They're fighty. They have some neat abilities. Again, if you're on the competitive scene, which is not really the focus of this video, they're currently like a little less favored compared to the cavalry, the Gorgruntas, but they're still a great unit to have in your collection and very fun to paint. And then I highly recommend the eBay or the second-hand market. If you look at the prices here, this is probably going to be the most expensive army of any of the ones we mentioned in this list, but you can really cut that down by looking onto eBay. There's a lot of Ironjawz floating around. And lastly, this may be my most controversial take of the video, but I believe that the Kruleboyz are a great starter army for Age of Sigmar. They take a little more finesse to play. Whereas the Ironjawz are described as brutal but cunning, the Kruleboyz are described as cunning but brutal. They follow the guidance of Mork, which is the more sneaky orc god, half of Gorka Morka. Things got a little weird in Age of Sigmar, and I won't get into the lore too much. But basically, they're jerks who live in the swamp. They don't play fair. They poison their weapons. They lie, cheat, and steal their way to victory on the in the lore and on the tabletop. So let's talk about what makes the Kruleboyz so great. So the biggest reason I recommend Kruleboyz as a great starter army is cost. They are one of the cheapest armies in the game, and they are only second to Stormcast, and that's because they're available in the Dominion box, and there's other good discounts available for them as well. They are very easy to get up and going for not a ton of money. You get nearly a starter army in the box with just the first purchase of Dominion, and it's pretty easy to find people selling the Dominion components right now because there's so many Dominion boxes floating around, and people who are highly competitive are not loving the Kruleboyz right now because they're a little weaker on the competitive or tournament scene, which I'll get to in a minute. Paint-wise, they are beautiful models, the best looking in the game in my humble opinion. They are kind of a more grim, dark, creepy, Lord of the Rings looking orc compared to the Ironjawz. The reason I give them a B is because they're just tougher to paint than Ironjawz or some of the simpler models because they have more details. There's more little fiddly bits. They have more spindly bits that are prone to break, like the spears. So just something to be aware of, but totally doable if you're just getting into painting, and they look amazing. Gameplay wise is where I give them all B minus. They probably, of the armies I mentioned, the toughest to pilot or play. The reason for this is they're very fragile. So just know if you're getting into this army, expect for your guys to die a lot. It's actually kind of part of the strategy is you want to play these a little more like chess. It's a more strategic army. You need to be comfortable trading your pieces for others. That's true of any army in the game, but just expect like most of your army to die every game as somebody who plays Kruleboyz primarily. But the rules are actually very simple and easy to keep together. They have some very simple core buffs that you can put on your units in two main buff pieces, which I'll discuss in a minute. And then their faction-specific rules are actually pretty straightforward. They have some little gimmicks with little tricks they can do before the game, but their main rule is just they do mortal wounds on a 6, which means every time you roll a 6, you don't have to roll to wound, and the wounds mostly go straight through with a couple exceptions. Model count is mid to high. You can end up with kind of a larger number of models compared to something like Stormcast with this army. So if you've seen my Kruleboyz tier list, you can probably guess where I'm going with this, but I would recommend for your first purchase for a Kruleboyz army, you definitely go with a Dominion box. For just $100, you're getting 940 points of Kruleboyz, and that can of course be made even cheaper if you split the box with a friend or just purchase this half of the box off of eBay or somewhere like that. You're getting most of the core units you need for starting a Kruleboyz army with this. You get your Hopgrots, which are an important screening, trading type of unit. They're there to die, basically. They're not very strong. You get your Gutrippas, which are kind of your key battle line unit. Those are the fellows with the spears. They're also not very strong, but you just kind of need them. And then you're getting a unit of Boltboyz, which are very strong. They have a very powerful ranged attack. And then you get a Shaman as well, which can buff up your Gutrippas or your Boltboyz or really any of the Orc units so that they're doing poison, that mortal wound damage on either a 5 or a 6 instead of a 6. So it essentially doubles your mortal wound output for a unit. And this is something that can take those Gutrippas that a lot of people assume like, oh, they suck. And then suddenly they're dumping out a bunch of this poison damage. So you kind of sneaky. It's a fun army, trust me. Now, as far as what you might want to buy next, you might want to get another one of these. It's going to be diminishing returns, which is why I probably wouldn't recommend buying a third, unless you just really want more of the key units. But what you're really looking for is another unit of Bolt Boys, another unit of Gut Rippers, and another Shaman. Maybe you use some more of the Hobgrots, and maybe you use the Mounted Guy. The other two heroes are not very strong currently in the game, but they do have their place and are perfectly serviceable in a starter army. And great looking models to boot. As for the first kit outside of Dominion, I'd recommend would be this Warcry set. It bundles together a unit of Gut Rippers and a unit of the Bolt Boys at a discount. You can still find it for about 68 bucks, although I think it is out of print on the Games Workshop website now. It does come with all of the options for building these units. This really only matters the most for the Gut Rippers. You can build them with the alternative weapons, the axes, but it also comes with their command options. So you get a banner and you get 2 instruments. So what I would recommend if you're combining this with Dominion, which does not come with the banner or instruments, which is a oversight or malicious intent, depending on how cynical you are. But if you combine this with it, you get 2 instrument guys, so you can put one of your instrument guys from this into your Dominion kit, and then you only get 1 banner, but you get a lot of extra Hobgrot banners in Dominion, so you can just glue those onto one of the backs of your spear guys, and you're good to go. And it paints up perfectly fine. That's how I got around that issue. Lastly, I would recommend getting a Snatch a Boss on Sludge Raker Beast. You can find this for $60 MSRP or about $51 at a discount. And it's 315 points. It's a great centerpiece model. It's a monster. He does a lot of damage, a lot of those mortal wounds, poison output, and importantly, he has this big 12-inch aura of buffing the damage on any mortal wounds caused by a roll of a 6, and then applies to himself as well. So suddenly your archer guys are doing 3 damage a shot instead of 2. He himself is doing 3 damage a shot instead of 2, and it can really stack up and make your opponent's day not so good if you pull it off well. So a great model. Now for some honorable mentions. First is going to be Maggotkin of Nurgle. No Chaos armies made it into this list, but if I was going to include one, it would be these guys for a number of reasons. The pros is they're very forgiving both to play and to paint. In terms of gameplay, they're very tough. Nurgle demons are this kind of gross, pestilent, plague-bearing demons that have this like blubbery plague skin, so they can absorb a lot of damage. They're gross, but they're awesome. They take paint really easily. They're supposed to be disgusting, so if you get some green or brown or whatever in the wrong spot, it'll probably look just fine, and you don't really have to worry about it too much. And they paint up really fast. And they're a good starter kit as well. You can see the Vanguard kit posted here to the right. They actually did a really good job with this one as they moved out of the old start collecting. It is more expensive than the start collecting kits, but you do get a good range of models, including the option for 2 heroes that are quite useful in there, as well as your basic battle line and some tougher battle line as well. The cons and why I ultimately didn't include them is that they do rely on summoning. Flesh Eater Quartz do as well, but there's kind of more models and more things to branch into for your summoning with Nurgle. It's a bit of a nuanced point. You could really kind of make the argument either way, but ultimately it was kind of the feculent gnarl moths that also make them more expensive, as well as branching into some of their other models. They can become more expensive quite quickly. The gnarl moths are their terrain piece. You probably want multiple of them. They're these infected trees, and they're not cheap. The next honorable mention is Night Haunt. I really went back and forth over whether I wanted to include Flesh Eater Quartz or Night Haunt as my death suggestion, and I ultimately went Flesh Eater Quartz. The Night Haunt, though, are something to consider, and a much nicer looking army, to be honest with you. The models are newer, and they're very well done. They paint up nicely. They have amazing models. They have a good starter kit in this Vanguard set that has several of kind of core units for starting an army. And their rules are good in a number of ways for beginners, and then a lot of things are consistent across the army. They have this rule called Ethereal, where everything in the army has a flat 4-up save rule that can't be modified. Every time you do a charge, you have this table where you have certain debuffs. And once you get the hang of it, it's pretty straightforward across the board how your stuff works. Now, the cons are that it can get pricey. Outside of this starter kit, the Nighthaunt models are pricier right now. They're harder to find at a discount because the army's gotten quite popular. They used to be a dime a dozen on eBay when in second edition, because the army was not very strong and it was in the starter kit. So, you know, just keep that in mind if you're interested in Kruleboyz, because something similar might happen to them in the future. And they have a higher model count. You're going to have a lot of ghosts to paint up. And the rules can be a con too, because while I said that it's kind of straightforward once you get the hang of it, you got to get the hang of it and remember how Nighthaunt worked differently than kind of core armies in the game, and know your table of your charge debuffs and just kind of know your army rules well, which applies to anybody, but I think they're a little it's a little less straightforward than Flesh Eater Courts, in my opinion. Anyway, that does it for this video. Let me know in the comments below like what your top armies would be for a new player, or what army you started with and why you liked it, or even if you didn't like it, why. That might be useful for other people reading along. And if you like the video, it does help out if you give me a like. Not to be that guy saying like, comment, and subscribe, but you know, if you want to, then I won't complain. Anyway, I hope you have a wonderful day. If it's morning, have a cup of tea or coffee, and if it's night, go to bed. Anyway, thanks for watching, and take it easy. See ya.